All right, just a short, sweet, simple video to finish up our notes on muscles. And in the case of the notes on muscles, we talked about how muscles contract and the sodium-potassium swap places, and that creates a chain reaction of electricity. So what we're going to look at today are muscle contractions that are considered to be normal. Now, normal does not mean it's going to happen all the time. It's just when it happens, it's supposed to be happening. Now, all of your life you've heard of what's called muscle tone, and this is what we call a tonic contraction. Now, we talked about these things called sarcomeres and how you have the actin and myosin protein patterns inside of our muscle fibers. Well, I always compare muscle tone to your car. So, for example, you're driving your car and you come to a stoplight and it's red, and you come to a complete stop. But the car in the lane next to you is just kind of rolling slowly. And so when the green light turns on, that car can accelerate faster than you because it was not at a complete stop. Well, that's what tonic contractions are to your body. No matter what, you always have some sarcomeres that stay contracted in a relaxed muscle. It allows you to contract your muscles faster. And so when people work out, it's not that they are creating thicker muscle, because all of our muscles are about the same. What they're doing is they're creating muscle tone. So when people work out, you know that their muscles stay basically contracted. That's what makes them thick. That's what makes them bulge, because their brain says, hey, you know what? This person is using this muscle a lot. And so this person is using this muscle to lift things a lot, or whatever. They're just using this muscle a lot. So the body basically keeps that muscle contracted just in case it's about to get used. So when we talk about muscle tone, these are muscles that we use a lot. And so it's basically like you don't put your foot completely on the brake. You let your car just keep rolling at a red light. So when the light turns green, you're able to take off faster. And that's what tonic contractions do for our bodies. So, like it says here, some sarcomeres stay contracted in order to save time when the muscles need to contract. Now, we also have what we call isotonic contractions. Now, with an isotonic contraction, the root word iso means to stay the same, and tonic is referring to tone. So when you move a muscle, in the case of an isotonic contraction, the pressure does not change, but the length does. And so a perfect example of this is you walking. When you walk, you're moving your leg muscles. That's why you're walking. But yet, the pressure on your leg muscles doesn't change. You weigh the same standing still as you do when you're walking. So this would be an example of an isotonic contraction. Or raising your hand. When you raise your hand, you're moving the muscles, but your arm weighs the same up in the air as it does hanging down by your side. So we do isotonic contractions all the time. And this is basically how we move our bodies. Now, this isn't carrying something. Well, this would just be like walking, and your muscles are carrying the same weight that they're always carrying, or you raising your hand. So the length is changing, but the pressure isn't. Now, that's the opposite of what's called isometric. Isometric means the same length. And so in this case, the pressure is changing. If you take your hands and you press your hands together as hard as you can, your arms will not move, but you can feel the pressure in those muscles. If you hold a book in your hand, that book puts weight on those muscles, but you're not moving the book. You're just holding the book. It's like when you're lifting things, that's kind of a combination of isotonic and isometric. So again, these are things that we do every day. Now, all of your life you've heard of a twitch. We're going to talk about twitch, tetanics, and trapeze. I'm going to do a twitch. Sorry, I was itching. Speaking of twitch, I'm going to do a twitch first. Now, all of your life you've talked about muscle twitches. Like sometimes you might say your eyelid is twitching, or you might have been sitting in a chair and all of a sudden like your leg muscles twitch. Well, in reality, that's not a twitch. That's something called a trep, or some people say a trepe. We don't really know why treps happen. We think it's just basically nature's way of either testing that muscle out or getting rid of some lactic acid. Usually when people say their eyelids twitch, it's the bottom eyelid. We don't use our bottom eyelid. Okay? Our bottom eyelid is basically a trash collector. We talked about how when you blink, you open and close your eyes, and it scratches your eyelid, your eyeball, and all the dirt collects in your lower eyelid. Your lower eyelid doesn't really move. But every once in a while, your lower eyelid will trepe, not twitch. We'll talk about twitch in a second. And so maybe it's just nature's way of checking to see if that muscle still works, or maybe some lactic acid has built up in that muscle and it needs to rapidly contract to push that muscle away. Or you might be sitting at the table and all of a sudden your leg muscle starts to trip. Well, if you think about it, you probably had a pretty strenuous day that day. And what's probably happening is lactic acid has built up in that muscle, and that muscle needs to rapidly contract to push that lactic acid out. So a lot of what you've been calling twitches in your life are actually these things called treps, or some people say trepes. A twitch is actually a reflex. Twitches are things that you do to protect yourself. So for example, if somebody hits you in that spot on your knee, you automatically kick, that's a twitch. Or when you start to fall asleep, our center of gravity pulls us forward a lot of times, or sometimes like when you're falling asleep, you might kind of fall forward and then you jerk back up. Or when you're falling asleep in the chair, you kind of fall backwards and you jerk back up. That would be a twitch. That is a reflex to keep you from either falling on your face or falling back and smashing your head into the floor. When you sneeze, you automatically close your eyes. That's a twitch. Okay? So twitches are reflexes. Now again, a twitch doesn't happen all the time, but when it happens, it's supposed to happen. Okay? And then we have the third T there, which are tetanic contractions. And tetanic contractions are basically smooth muscle contractions. When you move your arm, it doesn't have a strobe light effect. Okay? It's just this nice, simple movement. It doesn't twitch as you move your arm back and forth. Okay? Now, let's look at some abnormal muscle contractions. Okay? Abnormal muscle contractions are going to be things we don't want to happen. Okay? Now, you guys have all heard of AFibs. Those are those machines that we have in the schools or in malls, and they're basically the shock paddles. So when people go into have heart attacks, we use those shock paddles, and those are called defibrillators. Well, they get their name from what's called fibrillation. Remember, every muscle has a partner, and we call those partners antagonistic pairs, and they should work opposite of each other. So when one muscle is relaxing, the other muscle should be contracting. Well, in the case of defib, or in fibrillation, for some reason, both of these muscles try to contract at the same time. And that causes that body part to seize up. Okay? And so, for example, in the heart, you have 4 chambers. You have 2 chambers called the atrium, and you have 2 chambers called the ventricles. And they should work opposite of each other. Well, it's possible that the muscles, for some reason, get off kilter, and both heart chambers try to contract at the same time, so the heart seizes up. And that's what some causes of heart attacks are. And with the defib, what the shock does, it basically, just like you have fuse boxes in your house, and if you have an electrical surge, it blows the fuse, or it triggers the fuse panel, and you have to go back out and reset it. Well, that's what the defib tries to do. Remember, muscles contract because of electricity. Well, our electrical charge is negative 70 millivolts. There's like 120 volts running through a defib. So they tell you to stand back because we can't conduct electricity. So any electricity that goes through me, if I'm being defibbed, will also go through whoever's touching me. And so basically what those electric paddles try to do is blow a fuse. It tries to blow the heart fuse, and so that then it can go in and reset, and hopefully your heart starts beating like it's supposed to. Now this will happen to all of us when we die. You've all heard of rigor mortis before, and we talked about how calcium is what causes the sarcomere to start to contract. And so when electricity hits the muscle cells, the sarcoplasmic reticulum releases the calcium, and the calcium tells the myosin to start pulling. Well, when we all die, we have a huge release of calcium in our muscles. So all of our muscles try to contract at the exact same time. And that causes a condition called rigor mortis. And so all of our muscles seize up. And over time, that calcium will get used up, and then the muscles will begin to relax. So fibrillation is not something that you should be having happen to you all the time. Okay? Same thing is true with a convulsion. Some people talk about seizures, And seizures, convulsions are often used hand in hand. Okay? But the key thing with the convulsion is that this is a violent attack. Okay? A lot of times seizures, you look at the person and you realize something is going on, but they kind of slump over, or you realize that there's facial twitches or facial trepes, or you just know that something is happening. A lot of times seizures are silent. Convulsions are different. In a convulsion, this person is going to be violently reacting. So they might be, punching, kicking. They might be slamming their heads into the floor. Now keep in mind, this is all involuntary. They do not realize they're doing this. So anytime somebody is having convulsions, you need to lay them on the floor as quickly and as easily as possible and clear the area. Now they might be kicking, they might be flailing their arms, but the main thing is try to get something under their head, because it's possible they might start slamming their head into the floor, even if you just have to hold them in their lap. But whatever you do, do not try to restrain them, because these muscle convulsions can be so strong. If you're restraining them, you can cause the bones to break. Okay. Now, cramps. When you have a cramp, nothing's wrong, but something could be about to go wrong. Cramps are basically, remember, pain's your body's way of telling you something's wrong. So when you have a cramp, your brain is telling your muscle to seize up. And what usually happens, if you think about when you have cramps, it's after you've been working out or it's really hot and you've been sweating a lot. Because when you sweat, you lose salt. And you now know that we need sodium and potassium, both of which are ions, in order to create electricity and for our muscles to work correctly. So if you sweat a lot, you lose a lot of sodium and potassium. And so therefore, you cannot create the electricity and your muscles cannot work like they're supposed to. So your brain will tell these muscles to seize up and become painful. And that's your body's way of telling you to stop doing whatever you're doing. When you stop doing whatever you're doing, your body will cool down. When your body cools down, you stop sweating. And when you stop sweating, you stop losing salts. I remember ions are electrolytes. That's where they get their names from, electrolytes. Both have to do with electricity. Sodium and potassium are both examples of electrolytes. That's why after you work out, you crave salty foods, or you've been told to eat a banana, which has a lot of potassium in it. Gatorade, Powerade, if you read the labels, they are electrolyte drinks, which means they have a lot of ions in them. And in all honesty, Gatorade and Powerade are supposed to start having warning labels on them, because people with certain heart conditions or high salt levels, high blood pressure, can't drink these drinks. Because a lot of times drinking Gatorade is kind of like drinking salt water without tasting like salt water. So when you have a cramp, there's nothing wrong yet. Now, menstrual cramps are different, and we'll talk more about those later. Now, Charlie horse. I don't know who Charlie is, and I don't know what happened to his horse. So I don't know why Charlie horses are called Charlie horses. By definition, a Charlie horse is basically a muscle strain. You've pulled a muscle. That's it. Now, here you have a spasm. Okay? Do not get spasms and convulsions mixed up. Okay? Spasms are also considered to be types of seizures. Okay? These are just basically short, involuntary muscle contractions. We do see them happen with seizures, but they don't tend to be as violent. Okay? Sometimes you also, people with certain diseases like muscular dystrophy or Parkinson's disease, cystic fibrosis, they lose control of their muscle, their skeletal muscle, and it can cause them to twitch, or their body just move, or their arm kick, or their leg kick, or their arm move out. These would be examples of spasms. They're not violent, they're not going to cause bodily injury, but again, they're involuntary. Now, do not get a tetanic contraction mixed up with tetanus. Tetanus is a bacterial infection. It was one of your vocab words that talked about lockjaw. This bacteria feeds off of rust. Well, if you think about it, we have rust in our blood. Our blood has iron in it. When you mix iron with water and oxygen, it rusts. That's why our blood is red. So if you step on a rusty nail or you get cut with something that's rusty, that bacteria could be transferred into your bloodstream. Well, this bacteria produces toxins. That's its waste products. It gives off waste products just like we do. And those toxins cause our muscles to seize up. And for some reason, our jaw muscles are very susceptible to this toxin. And it literally locks your jaw. It's an incredibly painful death back in the day. Nowadays, you guys know that we have medicines to help with that. Now, just a few more muscular conditions. Keep in mind the difference between a disease and a disorder. Disorders are going to be genetic. Diseases are things that you catch. Okay. Now, on here we have something called a contracture. Okay. A contracture is not a disease. It's not a disorder. Okay. Contractures are basically when your body subconsciously curls up into the fetal position in order to try to protect your heart. We see this a lot in people who are in comas or people who are classified as being brain dead. Their body will curl up into the fetal position, and that's just a subconscious way of trying to protect the heart and the lungs. So a lot of times people in comas or people who are classified as being brain dead, physical therapists will come in and help stretch out their arms and legs in order to prevent the contractions from getting so bad it can actually tear tendons or break the bones. Now, myalgia. Myo, as you know, means muscle. Myalgia is just a fancy name for muscle pain. Now, muscular dystrophy is one that you've all heard of. This is a sex-linked genetic disorder, and in the case of muscular dystrophy, there's lots of different types, but this is what we call a neuromuscular disorder. And a lot of times in people with muscular dystrophy, we talked about this thing called an acetylcholinesterase, and this enzyme is needed to wake up the muscle cells. You're supposed to have acetylcholinesterase. Like I said, if you were sleeping at your desk, I have to shoot ice cold water at you. That's the only way I can wake you up. Well, a lot of cases with muscular dystrophy, either the muscles won't respond to this enzyme, or for some reason their body destroys the cells that make this enzyme. This is what's often called an autoimmune disorder, which means your own body destroys something that's supposed to be there. We're supposed to have acetylcholine. We're supposed to have acetylcholine. It's a hormone. It's a hormone made by nerves to wake up skeletal muscle. But people with muscular dystrophy, just depending on what type, they either don't make this or their muscles ignore it. So their muscles never wake up and their muscles never go to work. In the case of myasthenia gravis, this is also a neuromuscular disorder that deals with acetylcholine. The main difference between muscular dystrophy and myasthenia gravis is a lot of times with muscular dystrophy, it's autoimmune, and myasthenia gravis, the body is ignoring. And so we're actually going to talk about these more when we get to the nervous system and the immune system. But these are muscular disorders, so that's why I wanted to go ahead and bring it up. So at this point in time, you have everything that you need for your testal muscles.